addiction does not mean use and developing a problem. I can, for example, use something, have a drink, and go and crash my car. This is something called harmful use, which is very different from addiction. Why are we making this distinction? Because addiction usually results in a long-lasting changes to the brain, and it has long-lasting consequences.
Okay, so why does it happen? I mean, why do some people get addicted and some don't get addicted?
These are two different questions.
Okay.
One is, why does it happen? And two is, are some people more vulnerable or much more at risk? And this is very important to know if you have to, worry about how to prevent it, what to do, etc. So why does it happen? I mean, before you go to why does addiction happen, it would be good to ask the question, why do people use substances in the first place? Why do human beings use drugs of abuse or alcohol, or why do human beings play PUBG? That is, I think, the first question that one needs to answer. And that is related to the fact that human beings, like all animals, have parts of the brain whose job it is to motivate you. And this is called the reward circuit of the brain. And anything which stimulates the reward circuit of the brain increases the chance that the human being or the animal will do that activity again. For example, food. Food or sex stimulates the reward circuit of the brain, and it ensures that you will eat again or have sex again. And this is very important for the animal to ensure that life goes on. It is very important for evolution that life goes on. What happens when one uses drugs or one plays PUBG or goes onto the internet is that it stimulates this reward circuit much more than natural rewards do. And so people tend to use these substances over and over again. However, there are some people in whom this reward circuit to begin with acts at a lower level. And so when they get stimulated by drugs of abuse or by these games, etc., are more likely to use it again and again. I'll give you the example of thirst. If you're very thirsty, a glass of water can be the most appealing thing to you. If you're not thirsty and if you are fairly well sated, you won't really bother whether there's a glass of water or 2 glasses of water or 10 glasses of water. So there are some people who seem to be at much higher risk of wanting to use these substances over and over and over again. Now, there related to this, if I'm not getting very long in my answer, is everybody assumes that when one gets addicted, one is getting addicted because it causes intoxication. One feels high. That's part of the answer. But when a substance or an activity actually stimulates the reward circuit, what it is also doing is it is increasing what we call executive control. And this is important to know. This is really, really important to know to cut down stigma, because executive control is my ability to go and do things or to finish things, to have control over myself. And especially for people who lack this, this is something that they find very, very new and very, very appealing. And so they tend to do it over and over again. So the answer that we've always had, that drugs of abuse, etc., people are only doing to get intoxicated, to get high, that is not really entirely true. People are also, in a way, initially trying to get normal, to normalize themselves, to improve the functioning of their brains.
That's interesting. Okay.
Right? And so that brings us to the second question, which you asked, as to who is more vulnerable, who is at greater risk. And this is something that is really interesting to both Arun and me, because we've been doing this work for the last, for me, I've been doing it for the last 30 years of my life to try and understand who is at risk. And we know for one thing that young people are at risk.
Don't be a bit louder, we are losing you.
Young people are at risk. We know that young people are at greater risk than older people. For example, a person who starts using substances or starts drinking or using a drug at the age of 16 has an 85% chance of developing a problem by the time he or she is in his 30s, in their 30s. Whereas if you can delay first use till about 25 or after 25, the risk comes down to about 5% or less than 5%, which is the general risk in the population. So it is very, very clear that young people are at greater risk. And why are young people at greater risk? There are 2 or 3 reasons for that. One is the brain is still a work of art in progress in adolescence. It is not fully mature. And when we say not fully mature, the last great stage of maturation that takes place in the human brain is the fact that insulation of the wiring, which we call myelination, is occurring. And this is not complete till you're 25 or 30. And as you know, an insulated wire is much less prone to damage than an uninsulated wire. You know, for example, just as an example, if you were to put sulfuric acid on copper wire, you would get copper sulfate, and there would go your wire. If you have an insulated wire and you put copper sulfate on it, sulfuric acid on it, nothing happens. So that is one reason why younger people are at higher risk. 2 is younger people are more likely to be more impulsive, are more likely to listen to their peers rather than to their parents, are more likely to have a whole lot of other behaviors which make them more likely to take risks. So that is your answer to question number 2, with a caveat. I mean, if you will permit me, the next big question actually which will come from parents is, are all young people at risk? Are all adolescents at risk? Obviously, the answer is no. There are some adolescents who are at greater risk than other adolescents. And who are these adolescents? We now have a fairly good idea of who is at greater risk. One is young people who have difficulties in sustaining motivation. These are people who start off with a lot of enthusiasm, but halfway through they lose interest, get bored, and want to go on to something else. You know, the question I often ask these kids is, or their mothers, is your child one of the world's best starters and the world's lousiest finishers? And you'll have some kid looking at me guiltily saying, yeah, I start off things and then halfway through I lose interest. Today it's cricket, and tomorrow I say, who's going to play cricket? Let me do badminton. So this is one of the warning signs that we see. The other thing that we find in children who are at high risk is they tend to be much more impulsive in terms of action, that they are fidgety, can't stand in line, can't wait their turn, or in terms of words, that they blurt out, they say whatever comes into their head, the first thing that comes into their head, they say it. They are the kids who are always blurting out the answers in the class. The third thing that we find seems to increase greater risk is emotional reactivity. These are kids who are suddenly get angry or suddenly get sad, but it lasts for a short while, and then they feel very remorseful. So emotional reactivity, difficulty in recognizing other people's emotions, what people call lack of empathy. Unfortunately, these are often given very, very stigmatizing names. These are kids who are called flighty. These are kids who are called, not people who have anger discontrol, people who are called moody, etc. But these are things we know which seem to predispose young people to early experimentation, to developing problems, not just with drugs and alcohol, but with problems in various other areas of their lives. I think that's a very long answer to your question, but I thought that it needed elaboration. Yeah.
Doc, when people talk about addiction, they normally think of, say, cigarette smoking or alcohol or drugs at the most. What are other addictions that a person is susceptible to? Or what kind of cases do you see in your clinic?
Okay, so this is something that I'll also ask Arun to step in. I mean, I'll just sketch what we know about what causes addiction. One is, of course, the age-old substances which cause addiction, right? Which are things like alcohol, drugs, etc. And these in a way can be divided into two or three types. One is the depressants. These are substances which depress or reduce the functioning of the brain. These are used by people to calm themselves, etc. And this thing can be things like alcohol, can be things like cannabis, etc. On the other hand, you have other substances which are stimulants, which increase the activity of the brain. And yeah, these are things which we often use regularly in our lives. I mean, there's tea, there's coffee. These are all stimulants. Of course, then there are the illicit drugs like cocaine and the medicines like methylphenidate, which are also stimulants. A third category is the category called hallucinogens, which actually change the way people perceive their surroundings, perceive their uh, uh, sensations. For example, LSD, etc. Now, the jury is still out as to whether hallucinogens can cause addiction or not. It probably they can't cause addiction, and more and more we are starting to use these as medicines. Not that I advocate that young people should go and use hallucinogens. Uh, on the other hand, apart from substance, other non-substance addictions, these are behaviors, repetitive behaviors that we engage in. For example, things like gambling. The new one, which has been recognized by the World Health Organization, is internet and gaming. Things which have not been recognized, but we know these also lead to addictive behaviors, are things like shopping, sex, exercise, work. These are all things which predispose to repetitive use and lack of control. Arun, do you want to come in and talk a little bit about the non-substance addictions?
Yes, sir.
And what we see?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the traditional way of looking at addiction is that only the substances or the drugs of abuse which cause addiction. But as Dr. Vivek had pointed out, what is being realized is that there are other behaviors also could cause the addiction per se. And gambling is one thing which has been noted for time immemorial. Gambling has been quoted in our epics also. And that caused a significant amount of disruption in a person's life and a loss of control, which Dr. Vivek had explained, and salience in form of gambling takes over every other activities in the life, and that becomes the priority. Internet, there's a whole host of things inside the internet itself can make people hook onto it and get addicted to it, right from the gaming which is happening in the internet, the gamblings which can happen over the internet, social network site usage, like Facebook and WhatsApp, and there are other general contents, watching pornography, cyber addictions, getting into chats and relationship issues. All these things could also be a part of addiction per se. And sexual addiction is also something which is being noted in quite a lot of people, and although it's not being recognized as in the system, it is still there. Food, there are certain food addictions also has been noted. Exercise addiction, as Dr. Vivek had pointed out. So there are various behaviors which can give a reward, can also become an addictive behavior per se.
No, that sounds interesting. I mean, nice to know that exercise also can be addictive, That's a very interesting thought. But coming to it, what are the first symptoms that come through when you are getting to be an addict? And how do people around you start recognizing it? There are two things. I, as an addict, recognize the symptom, or the people around me, what kind of symptom do they have to keep a lookout for?
Shall I go with that, sir?
Yeah, Arun, you want to go? Go ahead.
I think the first thing people can look at is the responsibilities which one is bound to do. They start missing out on those things. Like, this is what observed in the early part of it, in terms of whatever social and other obligations with respect to one person, they missing out on that is something which can be easily noted. The other thing is how it affects one's own day-to-day functions, biological functions, in terms of food, sleep, right? How that is affecting. These are subtle indications to say that like there's something else is happening, right? Before even one diagnosing that okay, addiction is happening. Generally, what people note is that the deficits in the day-to-day function, that is something which is being noted. Job is something which gets affected later, but there are personal life related obligations will start getting affected faster.
Could you be a bit specific on that, Professor?
Yeah, can I just take that? I mean, see, what most people, talk about as early signs of addiction are things like eyes are red, all those things. Those come much later. What really happens, the subtle signs which parents need to look out for, is a difficulty, is a change in performance. That the child is not performing as well in school as he or she used to, is not socializing as much, is not mixing with the usual friends. There are physical issues, like Arun said, that is not eating as well as he or she used to, is not sleeping properly, is keeping very long hours. The changes in mood, seems to be down all the time, or is VP. Is there a change? So basically, a change from the normal. And if there is a fairly acute change from the normal, one needs to be worried about, not really worried about it. One needs to be aware of it. And very important to do is to start talking to the person, not necessarily jump to the conclusion that, oh, my child is using drugs or is on the internet, but start opening communications.
Interestingly, it's going to be very difficult in this age group because there are a lot of environmental and biological influences which they will have. So we cannot pathologize immediately. We'll need to be, as Dr. Vivek is pointing out, we need to start the conversation and understand what's going on with them. Things like other things which can be noted is changing dressing pattern, changing in hairstyles, and getting angry frequently without much provocation, talking more about individuality and their rights being violated. All these things are also something which is being commonly noted with these people.
Yeah, but it's also a sign of adolescence.
Also a sign of.
It's also a sign of adolescence.
No, but remember one thing: as an addict, how does he even have the capacity to understand he's falling into the trap? I mean, an outsider might notice it, but what about the individual who's going through it? Does he notice it?
Well, yes, of course, the individual notices it, and in fact, that is one thing that is a false myth that has been propagated. That in the clause of addiction, nobody has, the humanity is not left any longer. That is the worst myth that has been created. That addiction robs the person of personhood. At least, certainly not early in the game. People are always trying to come out. See, most people, especially young people, are always dreaming of a better life, are dreaming of doing things, are dreaming of achieving something. And anything that comes in between them and their dreams is something that bothers young people. We don't recognize that enough, and we don't give that enough, what shall I say, we don't protect that enough.
But so what is the first step of actually trying to solve it? And people around, how do you take the first step of seeking help?
Okay, I mean, long before the seeking and taking help, you would have probably understood by now what we are talking about. What we are talking about is that usage of the drug, or using the internet in this kind of harmful pattern, is just the tip of the iceberg. The real problem is the fact that this person has a difficulty has a difficulty in regulating moods, has a difficulty. So this person, this child, would have been having problems without drugs to begin with. So although most of us worry about what is going to happen after the horse has fled from the stable, which is what most of us do when it is too late, one should actually be opening up discussion as to recognizing young people who are at high risk and preventing, or at least ensuring that these problems don't get too severe. So this, I mean, I'm known to make crazy statements like there's no such thing as addiction. It is just the last straw on a brain developmental disorder. Okay.
Doc,
So
there's a question which says, do childhood traumas influence you being an addict in the later part?
Okay. So you've asked a very, very important question. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that this whole state of difficulty in sustaining motivation, impulsivity, etc., why does it occur? It occurs because of different ways of handling your challenges, which occur because of a slightly different psychological abilities, which is not abnormal. This is part of normal. Most of the kids who are at high risk for addiction are often highly creative, very clever, etc. But because of these, find it difficult to reach their full potential. And they're aware of the fact that they are more intelligent than the other kid. But because of this, the other kid is marching past and getting the medals, whereas me, being much more creative, I am sitting not able to reach my goals, and that makes the thing worse. I'll just give you an example. Many years ago, I had one kid who had come and who was obviously using cannabis, and I asked him what happens when you use cannabis, basically trying to get to know why he's using cannabis. So he said, Doc, most of the time I seem to be in a room where 25 people are speaking to me on the megaphone simultaneously. I mean, you can imagine how many years back this was. They still use megaphones. So I said, what happens when you use cannabis? He says, when they use cannabis, I can at least ask them to go away and come back one by one. So in other words, what he was telling me, and this is an important lesson I learned, was that cannabis, or at least something in cannabis, was actually improving a brain state he already had.
Doc, tell me
Not that I'm advocating it. What happens is, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Doc, the problem with today's in the society is that there are taboos, stigmas, inhibitions. How does one overcome that to seek help? The problem is there. I know I want to seek help, but these things are pulling me back.
Yeah. So, this is a very, very important question, which is why Arun and I, love to talk about these discoveries that we have made, because it tells you that the problem is not the alcohol or the cannabis. The problem is the difficulty in sustaining motivation is what we call the externalizing state. Now, if you do not treat that and you only stop the alcohol or drugs, the child will go back. The child will relapse because you have cured nothing. And this is what almost 100 years of 50 years of rehabilitation, this putting people and locking them in rehabilitation centers, etc., has taught us. It is also stigmatizing because alcohol use, drug use, etc., is so much stigmatized in our society. So we are trying to get people to reframe the question, reframe to the fact that there are some people who are having difficulties in dealing with their lives because the doctors have failed them, because the teachers have failed them. They have found one way to self-medicate themselves. It's lousy medicine. Long term, it has bad effects, but initially when they started, it worked. And so this is something that we need to understand. This is something society needs to understand. And it is also something parents and children need to understand so that they are able to talk about it. As soon as we start talking about drugs and alcohol, immediately the stigma just cuts in and nobody wants to talk about it. You want to hide it or you want to shame it.
Okay. Professor, there is a question to you. What is the advice you want to give parents regarding digital addiction amongst children? I mean, we can't address the whole issue in this talk, but are there any tips and advices and what the parents can do?
Right. See, not every child who any digital platform is going to get addicted to it. First, we need to understand what is happening over there. The majority of the what we call addiction is very different from what is happening in a normal day-to-day life. Every parent is handling issues with the kid, right? Addiction is somewhere people are not able to move out of the room all the time, using that, not eating, not using the toilet, and had to sit and keep gaming and gaming and gaming for days together. Like, but there are it's a spectrum of issue. Like, not everyone who uses the digital platform is going to get addicted to it. First thing we need to understand that. The second issue is that when we are exposing them to any digital platform, now why are they using that, and what are they using that for? All these things need to be discussed, and there needs to be a consensus which needs to be there in life. You need to. I'm talking about somewhere along the line. Even before moving on to the so-called addiction, we really need to see what is an agreed upon usage, right? What is the essential usage? What is the non-essential usage? This essential and non-essential doesn't work when one becomes addicted. But for regular use, and we all know that in this COVID-19 lockdown situation, all the schools are starting their classes online. What do? It's very difficult to differentiate between this and that. Now, one way of doing things, like, we really need to know what is happening inside the whole digital platform, number one. Second, make sure that while the digital platform and interaction digital platform happens, you also should make sure that in real life also communications keep happening. And third thing, make sure that there are other rewards from the real life which is coming up, like right from interacting with people or going outside, having a family get together, family values, play, go to a playground and having a play, right? They should be allowed to explore all the forms of rewards. If they are stuck only with a gadget, obviously they will go into that full on. But if they have been exposed to multiple things, you shouldn't prevent them from using particular things. Make sure that they are doing multiple things, right? Not stuck with only one part, and enthuse them to do multiple other activities, right from physical to other mental activities. And the most important thing is you also should do that. What rule which you put for them, you also should follow. If you don't, then you're not going to achieve things, because they will ask the question. They know better than you.
Yeah, so the whole thing about addiction starts early. I mean, what do we do as far as addiction is concerned? Number one is we have to intervene early. Intervene early to ensure that there is healthy neurodevelopment, which involves things like intelligent parenting, which Arun was talking about. School or brain-based education, because school seems to be a very, you asked a little while back, no? Adversity, whether childhood adversity gives rise to these things. And the answer is yes. I mean, one of the big things that causes vulnerability is, of course, genetics, right? But genetics is not the only answer. You can be born with all the genes in the world, but the environment at every moment is coming and changing the expression of these genes. They're switching on or switching off these genes. So school seems to be a very, very important antidote. Proper schooling seems to be a very great antidote to all these things. Group play, art, these seem to be like developmental fertilizers. Socialization, which Arun was talking about, that the more children play with each other, the better they learn about some of these protective skills. Play, shaping screen time. Parents need to shape their screen time. It's not as if you tell people not to use screen, because in our 21st century life, that is impossible. But you need to shape it. There needs to be some timing related to screen time. And these things are available. These advisories are available. Nutrition seems to be a very important thing, which seems to be important. Neurotoxins, that is things, for example, I mean, kids who have more arsenic in their groundwater seem to be at higher risk. Go figure. The second thing that we need to do for children, and which is a general thing, is to delay first use. I mean, we live in a world where we can't be idealistic about it, and we can't say that ban everything. But at least can we have a system where we delay first use? Let the child learn from the peers of the internet. Always discuss with your child the scientific rationale of delay rather than unilaterally give messages to say no, or worse still, to give scare tactics that if you drink, this is what is going to happen. You'll go blind or you will die early. Those scare tactics don't help at all. This just say no is one of the most stupid things that anybody has ever heard in a century. Healthy addictions are alternatives. This is really important. We need addictions, but what kind of addictions? Adaptive, healthy addictions are necessary, and these are very good. And the fourth thing that parents need to know is be aware of the possible vulnerabilities. I mean, we usually go from white to black. Oh, nothing, everything is okay, to nothing is okay. One needs to be aware. Parents need to teach themselves about some of these things. At one school, one parent said, "Oh, I've never used drugs in my life, so I know nothing." I very rudely turned around on the parent and said, "Well, you're doing a disservice to your child by knowing nothing. You please come prepared. If you are parenting, be prepared to be a parent." And the other thing that one hears from parents is, "Oh, I'm a friend of my child. I'm really friendly. We are both friends." Well, don't be a friend. Your friend has your child has many friends. Be a parent. Your child has only one parent. So these are things which are very necessary to do.
That was a very important statement to make, Doc. I think it was required, especially the last two lines you said. And that's exactly what we see when you deal with parents.
Yeah.
They said they want to be friends. And that's not really healthy in long run. Look, they say, does addiction also lead to other mental health illnesses?
Well, I mean, let's put it this way. Addiction most of the people who have mental illness problems often try to self-medicate with these substances. So we know, for example, that people who have mental illnesses often smoke much more or use things. Cannabis is one drug which parents need to be aware of, that cannabis can trigger off a disease called schizophrenia or psychosis. And that is one of the major reasons against the use of cannabis. Because young people will come and say, "But you know what? The internet says it's safe. It's safer than smoking cigarettes." And the answer is, it's probably true, but in 5% of people who are genetically prone, it might trigger off, schizophrenia, which is a very, very severe, mental illness. So, which is why it's probably not such a good idea to start smoking cannabis when you are very young. Of course, as I said, delay first use is one of the bigger principles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I mean, we're almost coming to the last quarter of the hour.
Mm.
So if you guys got any questions, please start asking them. And Doc, as they're asking the questions, what are the myths and misconceptions about addiction?
Oh, there are many. I don't know where to start. Arun, could you help? What are the myths and misconceptions?
First is also about the question which was asked earlier about whether the people have insight at all or not, about their own illness. I would say that any person who wants to change certain or who is into certain beliefs or behavior system, they are always in three different states. One, they completely believe in it. They deny any other alternatives. Second, they remain contemplative. They are ambivalent. Third, they do want to change. Right? Whether it is I am having a diabetes and my eating habits are not good, and I want to change it, the same thing follows. Like initially, if I get a abnormal blood sugar value, then I would want to change things. I would do things in heroic fashion, and then I just stop trying it. Then I go into a rigid phase that I deny that it's not a problem at all for a period of time. But doesn't mean that I don't know that this is causing trouble to me. It's difficult for me to accept to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that it is. I am doing a mistake. Like I don't want to feel negative about it. So I just want to deny and be rigid about things like. then they can move on to the phase of being ambivalent, like say, okay, should I accept or not? If I accept, it's a failure of myself. Like then there is something strong stimulus come, they agree with that, right? So any person who have addiction also goes through a similar thing. So we really need to wait for the right time and right teaching moment to help a person. When we jump into a wrong phase, then we will face all this rigidity. When we wait out and then try to help them, it might be you might be able to achieve it better. So the first thing is that these people doesn't have any insight into it, is not agreeable. They do have insight into it. It is that they won't be able to agree to you all the time. So even if they are not agreeing to you as right now, they will be coming back. So don't become defensive. Don't get into their bad books. If you are able to go with them, when they want to change, they will uh, get on to you, and you can make the changes. Like, let me start with that.
I mean, actually, Arun reminded me, the other major myth is the fact that this is a purely voluntary thing. That only if he or she wanted it, they could stop. They don't want it, and therefore they are not stopping. They are slaves to their addiction. What one must realize is that when addiction occurs, that there are physical changes in the brain that occur. Certain genes get switched on and switched off, which means that these are permanent changes that occur. It is like learning that occurs in the brain. When one repeats one thing over and over again, there are changes that occur in the brain, and so you can't just unlearn addiction by saying, okay, from tomorrow I will not have a drink. So the only voluntary thing in addiction is when you first use it. And that too, it may not be voluntary, because you might, because of your temperament, be more likely to be risk-taking, etc., and more likely to take greater risks. So that is the other great thing. So that, this has spawned quite a lot of misery, because one assumes that we can just talk people out of addiction. We can counsel people out of addiction. We can put people in rehab centers, and if they don't drink for 3 days, 30 days, then the addiction is gone, which is the same kind of thing. And there's a question here that we missed a chance during the lockdown of making everybody non-addicts by continuing the prohibition. Prohibition is not something that can be really done properly. While prohibition is a different topic, and I don't want to talk about it, but this is not the way to. I mean, in a place like Saudi Arabia, for example, where there's no alcohol, are people not addicted? They're addicted to other things. Addiction is the manifestation of other things going wrong in the brain and in life.
Now, I know people who have given up smoking overnight, or have stopped drinking, in spite of their heavy drinkers. How come some of them can do it and some
They are
can't?
not, as I said, they're not. Everybody is not addicted. Just heavy drinking is not addiction. Heavy smoking is not addiction, and there are always exceptions to the rule. Okay, but that is not to speak just because my uncle, who was in the army, gave up smoking 2 large packs of 20s on one day, which I also doubt, doesn't mean that 99% of smokers can do that. So that I mean, at best, I would say is a stupid statement.
I'd like to add on that myth. Another thing is it's about all these people are having criminal tendencies. This is something which is also in people's mind, and that influences stigma towards addiction itself. Like, all these people who are getting addicted are some sort of criminal background or something criminal with their life. Because of this, there is a lot of stigma which comes up. Right? We need to understand the fact these are people, normal people, who have certain brain changes which had caused certain difficulties in them. Because of that, they are not able to change certain behaviors, and we really need to work with them in a long thing. There's also another question about genetics and multiple relapses. What do we do? We really understand that this is disease of a longer duration. Ups and downs are going to happen. What we need to do is, we cannot see cross-sectionally and expect changes to happen faster. Once addiction sets in, that's where the problem comes. We are talking about preventing it, but once addiction happens, we really need to work with them in a longitudinal fashion. People reduce a lot of harms which comes from their own addictive behaviors, but there can be lapses and relapses which will happen in the course. We really need to work with them. We need to continue working with them. We can't go against them because they have lapsed or relapsed. Only when we keep working with them in a longer term, we may be able to see a better functionality and better life in them.
So why are the addicts always called recovering addicts once they get through the therapy?
That is an outcome of the AA. The Alcoholics Anonymous, sees this as an illness, a lifelong illness. Now there is that from which one never recovers. Under the theory of the Alcoholics Anonymous, you never are recovered. I mean, alcoholism is always there in the background, and it can come anytime. And so you're a recovering addict. You're trying to recover, but you never get better. To a certain extent, there is a little bit of truth in that, because relapses are the rule rather than the exception. As I explained, that when addiction occurs, it actually leads to long-lasting structural, functional changes in the brain. And therefore, people are very prone to relapses. But it does not mean that people don't get better. People actually get better. Most people get better. People are able to lead healthy lives. People, we can talk to you about a whole lot of people, especially young people. Of course, the longer you suffer from any illness, whether it is diabetes or TB or whatever, the worse are your chances. So especially for young people, I mean, I'll give you one example. There was one young girl who was actually, you spent 6 years in a rehab center. She was taken from rehab center to rehab center to rehab center. She was also, very, very violent to other people as well as on herself. She, body was full of slash marks. She was carted over to our hospital, straight from the rehab center, taken to the hospital, taken to the airport, put into a flight. Some helpful doctor sedated her, and whichever airline brought her over. And then we found that the biggest problem was related to this whole externalizing symptoms. We started treating that, and we found it took several years, and we found that she was able to manage her life better. She passed her class 12. She's finished her her undergraduation. She's finished her post-graduation in the UK. She's staying in the UK and in a job. She was trying to come back, but she got caught in this COVID thing. And so she's there right now without a job, sitting there. She still drinks on Fridays and Saturdays. She has more or less stopped using cannabis, but she did some cannabis when she was in college. But she put herself through college. She is now trying to take over her father's company. So people do get better. But the issue is, you have to target what you have to target. Just stopping the substance does not get people better. In the same way, I mean, I'll just give you an example. Diabetes. Just getting people to stop eating sugar is not going to cure anybody's diabetes.
Oh, perfect. That's interesting. Any questions, guys, out there? Doctor, somebody who said, can cannabis-induced schizophrenia be cured?
Big question. Look, schizophrenia is a curable disease, okay? Everything is curable. But schizophrenia is a very severe illness, and which is why I said that the chances of developing cannabis-induced schizophrenia are high, and therefore young people should be made aware that this is there, that this risk is there, and they should, if they are going to use or not use, they should be aware before they use.
Doc, is there a support system to help the addicts?
Well, there are many support systems. I mean, for example, there is the AA and the NA, which has very age-old support systems. They have their own way of looking at things. I mean, we don't necessarily agree with everything that they say, but they have a wonderful and brilliant, brotherhood. So that is there. Apart from that, I'm not really sure that there are any kind of support system in that sense. While there needs to be a support system, we are more and more looking at it as a brain illness. So we are looking at it as an illness with a cause and with a cure. And so the need for this brotherhood, while it's still there, is not as critical in the model that we are trying to talk about than in the earlier model when it was an illness without a cure.
The very interesting question of the participants: can harming yourself get you addicted to pain?
Brilliant question. There are some people who actually are called cutters, and they slash themselves, they cut themselves, and they have societies on the internet where they have international things where people at the same time, cut themselves. But whether that is an addiction or what, we really don't know. I really wouldn't classify it as addiction, but then of course there is loss of control. Of course there is some sort of craving, etc. So
Interesting.
It happens.
That's very interesting.
But any of these behaviors need to be, if these behaviors are found, whether it has to be labeled as addiction or not, we need to go to the underlying reason why they are going in.
Yes. Often a lot of these people have other, psychiatric illnesses as well.
Doug, you have any questions to ask the participants?
I actually have. I would actually like to know. I mean, this format does not allow us, but I'd actually like to know, what is the prevalent attitude towards addiction, among people, and how they react to this kind of this kind of story that we are telling them about addiction being an epiphenomenon or a phenomenon of an underlying brain disorder. And does it answer questions about people they know or problems they would have had themselves, etc., or is it something that they find totally far-fetched?
Okay, guys, I think it's very important. That's exactly what Hoopster is trying to do. We do not want to be a one-off webinar story. We want you guys to participate. And like what Dr. Benegal asked, could you please write to us and say, was this useful? Or what did you get from it? Or what do you want more? And the idea is, can we build that system, the support system, or a kind of ecosystem to actually help each other out? So please don't hesitate to send us your thoughts, your reactions, and stuff like that. It's you can address it to bala@4c.in. It's a very interesting question. How much of willpower do you need to get out of addiction?
Now the question is that one of the difficulties that are there in people who are prone to addiction is the difficulty in sustaining motivation. So by definition, these are people who have poor willpower in that sense. So in a sense, you are, when you demand willpower of people who are prone to addiction, you're actually demanding that a person who doesn't have two legs, start running the 100-meter Olympics dash. Yes, he or she can, but will need very good prosthetics to cover that deficit.
Perfect. I think we are almost running out of time. Any last question? We can take in 2 more questions. Anybody else has got anything interesting? Professor, do you have anything to ask the audience?
Not really. One thing which I want to add on with whatever has been discussed is that one of the preventive strategy with respect to parents is that networking among themselves. In fact, to understand what's happening with their kids, it is one, interacting with the kid is important. It is also important to know what the friend of the kid is doing, right? So it is good to keep networking with among parents, to be aware of what's happening around. That is will be helpful. And also having a significant other for the kid apart from the parents also, where whenever the kid needs to discuss, there is someone for the kid to go ahead and discuss, right? These two things I want to press upon.
If I can put in 10 seconds worth of, what helps in parenting, one is keep lines of communication open with your child. Talk frequently, be curious, know your child's friends, be respectful yet free to disagree, and state your points. Most of the time we are ashamed to state our points. Avoid shaming the child, but be free to express disappointment. Don't beat about the bush about this, about your worry that the child may or may not be taking substances, etc. But do not make veiled threats. If you think something should or should not be done, please give your reasons for it. No point being cool. As I said earlier, be a friendly parent, not a friend. Have very explicit house rules that this, in our house this is what we do, and actions can have consequences, and good deeds will have their rewards, bad deeds will have their lack of rewards. And it's okay to have distinct adult versus child adolescent can do's. There are certain things adults do, certain things children and adolescents cannot do, and there are reasons why they cannot do it. And focus on the child's abilities and less on the drug use. Avoid the drug addict, you're a drug addict theme.
Doc, how important is to get the mental health issue awareness into schools?
Oh, absolutely. And schools are the worst places for children with difficulties. And I don't only mean drug addiction. I mean children who have difficulty with attention, children who have difficulty with learning. Most schools. There will be a lot of good schools who have counselors, etc. But generally, by and large, schooling is a very, very important thing. And all the scientific work that we have done, which show that children can have major difficulties in many fields, which give rise to risk for addiction, etc. But just having a good school environment can be very protective.
So do you think taking mental health programs to school is important?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Why do you think so?
Because young people, through a very, very important part of their development, spend a large proportion of their time in schools. To a certain extent, whether we like it or not, whether teachers like it or not, they are the most important role models that we develop in our lives. Till I am 60 plus, I still remember my school teachers and what they said and what they didn't say and what they did, etc. And so it is important that a lot of these messages come from teachers. We often reject our parents. We very rarely reject our teachers. We might make fun of them, but we rarely reject what they say to us.
Thank you, Doc. I think we're running out of time. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Professor Arun.
Thank you.
It was lovely to have you around. And we will do something. We are working at Hoopsters to bring about, various activities to create awareness on mental health.
The Beautiful Mind, Simplifying Mental Health. For more mental health awareness videos by leading experts, log on to www.hoopsters.in.